Okay.
Yes, ma'am. We are live now and recording is also in progress.
Right. So, good evening, everybody. On behalf of L.A.D. and Srimati R.P. College for Women, I welcome you all on this virtual platform to the Dr. Kamala Narayanan Memorial Lecture. We are very privileged to have with us this year's Sahitya Academi Award Winner, Shanta Gokhale, to deliver a second memorial lecture. Welcome, Shanta ji, to L.A.D. College.
Thank you.
On behalf of our college, I am honored to welcome the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Gondwana University, Dr. Prashant Gokhale. Welcome, sir, to L.A.D. College. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of distinguished academicians attending this talk. Dr. Ujjwala Chakradev, Vice Chancellor of SNDT University, Mumbai, will shortly join us. Professor Pramod Pavrekar, Senior Consultant, TUSA and NAC Expert, is also to join us. I welcome all of you, my colleagues, my students, academicians, literature lovers, and my friends who are here this evening from across India to this memorial lecture. I'm especially grateful to Shanta Gokhale for instantly accepting our invitation. I welcome our officiating principal of our college, Dr. Pooja Pathak, to this second memorial lecture. Dr. Kamala Narayanan was the head of the Department of English and a well-beloved teacher. She was meticulous in her work and an exacting teacher as well as colleague. If the Department of English of L.A.D. College is one of the strongest in Nagpur University, it is because of women like Dr. Kamala Narayanan, who worked with zeal and enthusiasm at everything. She set the bar nicely high. Language departments across the world are built up on the rock-solid foundations of the dedication of the teachers who inhabit those spaces. Narayanan Madam was a dynamic personality and was a very strong presence on campus. She is remembered by all who knew her as a very good teacher, a supportive colleague, and a steady friend. She joined the Department of English, L.A.D. College on 15th of July, 1958, and she retired on her birthday, 15th August, 1997. Narayanan ma'am knew everyone in the college personally and would make it a point to remember every major and minor happening in their lives. Warm and human, she wore her heart on her sleeve. She was my first HOD from 1991 to 1997 when she retired. I remember her fondly today and I pay my respects to her memory. Therefore, when the Department of English of L.A.D. College thought of instituting a lecture series, it had to be in her name. Our former head and vice principal of her college, one who gave of herself so generously to her subject, English literature, and taught it so well to her students. I invite now Dr. Pooja Pathak, officiating principal of L.A.D. College, to welcome Shanta Gokhale and say a few words.
Good evening, everyone. L.A.D. and Srimati R.P. College for Women is an institute who has pioneered in giving quality education to students since years. Our college is way ahead to go beyond traditional patterns and focus on quality and relevance. Following this path, Department of English has taken this quality initiative of instituting Dr. Kamala Narayanan Lecture Series since last year. Very proud to say that this is our second year now. And we are so fortunate to have Shanta Gokhale as an eminent and award-winning speaker today. On behalf of all my colleagues, I would like to welcome you, madam, for this lecture series.
Thank you.
I would also like to welcome some eminent guests today. Dr. Prashant Gokhale, who is the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Gondwana University. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
We are also fortunate. Welcome, sir. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We are also fortunate to have Dr. Ujjwala Chakradev, who is the Honorable Vice Chancellor of SNDT University in Mumbai. Welcome, Madam. Also, Dr. P.N. Pabrekar, who is a Senior Consultant in RUSA. We have so many eminent guests today for this lecture series. We have our Society President, Advocate Sunil Manohar. Due to his busy schedule, he hasn't joined, but definitely I would like to take his name. He is the President of Women's Education Society. We have our former Head of English, Dr. Shamla Nair, also former Principal, and the Director and Secretary of Women's Education Society. I would like to welcome you, Madam. Other WS members as well. We are also very fortunate to have Dr. Deepali Kotwal, who is the former principal of L.A.D. College and under whose guidance we are fortunate to have this program today. And I would like to welcome all my staff members, vice principals, and all my students for this wonderful activity today. Thank you so much, Madam, for accepting our invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pathak, for those words of introduction. Our speaker for the second Dr. Kamala Narayanan Memorial Lecture is Shanta Gokhale, a well-known name in Marathi and English literary, theatrical, translation, journalism, and cultural circles. There isn't anybody in Maharashtra and India and abroad who hasn't read Shanta at some point in their lives, or watched her translations on stage, or read her incisive articles on the arts page of the Times, or read her criticism in countless essays and book chapters in landmark publications. Shanta Gokhale is a bilingual writer and has a formidable body of critical work. She is also an award-winning novelist, a translator, a playwright, scriptwriter, teacher, and has even worked as a public relations executive at Glaxo. Shanta Gokhale resists definition, I quote from Jerry Pinto, in the introduction to his book, The Engaged Observer, which is a compilation of some of her select writings. Jerry Pinto calls her Mercury, not for her temper, nor for her, as I personally feel, for her quicksilver mind, but because she cannot fit into any one particular label. Jerry further says, this may be one reason why, even after I had marshaled all that was available of her writing, I almost despaired of her ever being able to put together a reader that would sum up her work in the world of words. Shanta Gokhale has written 2 novels in Marathi, Rita Velenkar and Tya Varshi, called Crowfall. Both won the Maharashtra State Award for the Best Novel of the Year and have been translated by her into English. She is a playwright and a theatre critic of high standing. Though critic is not enough, we must call her theatre historian, considering her books, the edited works of Veena Pani Chawla, Satyadev Dubey, and the oral history of experimental theatre in Mumbai called The Scenes We Made. She has written several scripts for feature films, documentary films, and been a producer for many award-winning films. She has translated from Marathi into English the plays of Mahesh L. Kunchwar, Vijay Tendulkar, and G.P. Deshpande, Satish Alekar, and Rajiv Naik. In fiction, she has translated Geet Patel's play, Mr. Behram, and Jerry Pinto's book, M and the Big Whom, from English into Marathi. Apart from several plays, she has also translated into English the novel Dhag by Uddhav Shelke. Her translation of Smriti Chitre, the memoirs of a spirited wife by Lakshmi Bai Tilak, has won her this year's prestigious Sahitya Academi Award. Congratulations for that huge honor, ma'am. She has written and edited several other books on theatre, including, as I mentioned, The Scenes We Made, an oral history of experimental theatre in Mumbai. Shanta Gokhale has been a writer and translator since 1960. She has been a cultural columnist with The Independent, The Sunday Times of India, Midday, and since 2006 with Mumbai with the Mumbai Mirror. Her essays, short stories, short fiction, novels, and autobiographies are in Marathi and English. Shanta Gokhale has been on the board and advisor to a slew of institutions, from the NCPA Mumbai to the National Gallery of Modern Art. In 2016, Shanta Gokhale received the Sangeet Natak Academi Award for her overall contribution to the performing arts. She is Mumbai's best loved and very easily accessible sounding board. She has listened to countless ideas and manuscripts by both budding and established writers. She's Mercury. And if you listen to her on her in countless YouTube videos, which we are fortunate to listen to, or if you read her like I have been doing for the past week now, she is such a compassionate voice. She stays in your head. You listen, you hear her words speaking to you, witty, funny, sarcastic, compassionate, ironic, but most of all, empathetic. Most of all, empathetic to whatever she sees and observes. No wonder Jerry Pinto calls her the engaged observer. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome Shanta Gokhale to the second Dr. Kamala Narayanan Memorial Lecture. Shanta Gokhale, please. The floor is
Thank
yours.
you. Thank you. I feel tremendously oppressed by this long introduction you've given. Anyway, I would like to say at the start that speaking is not my scene. Only writing is. So I shall be reading my speech. I have to begin by thanking L.A.D. College and Ruta, the head of the Department of English, for inviting me to deliver the Kamala Narayanan Memorial Lecture. I unfortunately did not have the opportunity to meet or work with her, but I do respect her memory as a teacher. I too was a lecturer once, and I know how much time and thought go into preparing every single lecture. To spend an entire working life teaching, which I didn't do, often thanklessly, requires commitment of a very high order. So I salute Dr. Narayanan's memory, and I'm extremely happy to be speaking in this memorial lecture. Actually, speaking today itself puts me into a very ironic situation. I have chosen as my subject the necessity of silence in our personal, public, and most importantly, in our creative lives. And yet, I shall be making a great deal of vocal noise for the next 40 minutes or so to advance this plea for silence. I know of another woman. She's like a kindred spirit to me. She lives some 10,000 miles away. And she once found herself in a similar situation as mine. Her name is Susan Cain. She's an American writer and a self-confessed introvert. The kind of person who would rather not be seen than seen, who would rather not be heard than heard. She discovered over years of observation and study that introverts have much to offer the world. And so she ventured into the public space some 10 years ago with a book called Quiet, the Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. The book became an instant bestseller, and she was hauled willy-nilly into the service, into the circus that we call book publicity. This meant giving endless interviews, attending readings and signings, and answering dozens of readers' questions. And that wasn't the end of it. She was also invited to deliver a TED talk. She had never spoken in public before. So she went through months and months of training in preparation for that dreaded day. When the day came, she also opened her talk with something similar to my opening lines. She said, I published a book about introversion. It took me about 7 years to write. And for me, those 7 years were total bliss because I was reading, I was writing, I was thinking, I was researching. But now, all of a sudden, my job is to be out here talking about introversion. Well, you might be a writer, as I am. You might have written the most significant book on your subject, but in the end, this book is a product, even if it is preceded by research, deep thought, and a daily struggle for expression. Yes, you have created a product. You have become a supplier for the business of publishing books. Your book must be marketed. It must sell. Consequently, from being a quiet writer, you have become a babbling publicist. That's the system, and you are suddenly part of it. The system is called capitalism. Noise is the product of industrialization. I don't plan to trace the progress of industrialization from England to our country, nor even the history of capitalism, which followed as its natural outcome. What I want to emphasize here is that noise began when agriculture, with its vast silences, gave way to factories with their ear-splitting sounds made by machines inside the factories and by several of its products like motorbikes and cars outside the factories, disrupting civilized living. Industrial noises are now part of our ambient sound. The juggernaut of history, of industry, is too far gone for its advance to be either reversed or checked. Nor indeed would most of us want that to be done. Even Mahatma Gandhi, the most trenchant critic of post-industrial modern life, was powerless against it. He too traveled by trains rather than bullock carts to wherever his presence was required. But many of his thoughts about what silence can give us in our personal lives are still valuable enough to ponder. He says, before modern civilization came upon us, at least 6 to 8 hours of silence out of 24 were vouchsafed to us. Modern civilization has taught us to convert night into day and golden silence into brazen din and noise. What a great thing it would be if we in our busy lives could retire into ourselves each day for at least a couple of hours and prepare our minds to listen to the voice of the great silence. The divine radio is always singing if we could only make ourselves ready to listen to it. But it is impossible to listen without silence. Other thinkers have referred disapprovingly to human noise. We talk even when we have nothing to say, simply to prove as much to ourselves as to the world that we exist. Without knowing it, we twist Descartes' dictum, I think, therefore I am, into I talk, therefore I am. We cannot control industrial noise for obvious reasons, but we could control human noise if we wish to, but we don't. Is this solely the result of the crisis of identity that industrialization has thrust us into? Or is it also and equally the result of culture? Have we in India inherited noise as our cultural legacy? Japan springs to mind first when I think of industrialization and culture. Despite Japan's being a leader in the manufacture of products which are capable of producing as much noise as any, the people themselves are conscious practitioners of silence. This, I suppose, is a direct consequence of the values of contemplation and mindfulness that they have inherited in their culture. Mindfulness is simply being attentive to every lived moment without allowing anything to distract us from it. In this connection, I remember a story that a banker friend of mine told over and over again. He had spent 3 years as director of his bank in Tokyo. And he described to me how every morning when he arrived at the office, he would find the cleaning woman scrubbing the steps silently, concentrating on every stroke of her mop. At the end of it, the office had gleaming steps. We often think of silence as belonging to saints, but here was an ordinary working woman doing a job that we consider to be menial, but with the same attention that a poet might devote to a line of poetry. Where did her silence come from? It came from Japan's pre-industry roots in Zen Buddhism, which is reflected today as much in everyday life as in Japanese aesthetics. We only have to visit a hospital in my city, Mumbai, to compare our so-called ordinary people with the so-called ordinary people of Japan. A hospital is supposed to be a place which should be ideally noiseless. And yet it is full of the incessant chatter of nurses, ayahs, ward boys, and patients' visitors. It is like being in a bazaar or a playground fair. When I was growing up, the highest respect was accorded to any individual who was described as a man of character. We don't hear that phrase anymore because that is not the kind of individual that we value anymore. What were the characteristics of such a person? He was quiet, serious, disciplined, and honorable. With the coming of industry and the displacement of people from village to city, from fields to factories, character was replaced by personality and charisma. The charismatic man is one who is rarely quiet. He leads an active rather than a disciplined life, exudes self-confidence, and he finds that too much honesty is a hurdle while selling himself in the cutthroat competition of the marketplace. The marketplace, whether we like it or not, has become a compulsive part of our lives. Tune into any medium of communication and you will hear enthusiastic and loud voices urging you to hurry and buy this, hurry and buy that. There is no time to waste. Last day, last few minutes, grab, 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 or it'll all be gone. Your neighbors will have it. You will not. Think of the shame of that. Models in advertisements are positioned as our role models. Look how beautiful they are. Don't you want to be like them? The world's eyes are on you, measuring you up. What's inside you doesn't matter. What is outside does. In the marketplace, every individual has to be a performer. We have all seen what this does to a child who is shy and introverted. Parents and teachers worry about him. They thrust him onto the school stage to make him bold. Never mind what this does to him. The sea of faces before him gives him stomach cramps. He forgets what he is expected to say. He wants to run away and hide. Finally, he bursts into tears and does just that. Teachers and parents do not bother to hide their deep disappointment. He has not allowed them to succeed in doing their duty by him. They wish to prepare him for the outside world where the highest rewards are reserved for the bold and the beautiful. And he is going to miss out on them. Ultimately, a time comes when even the most dedicated teachers and parents give up the fight. The boy is left alone at last, not out of respect for who he is, but out of despair. Meanwhile, school bullies taunt him with the word reserved for children like him, loser. If this child is a loser, then the winner has to be his opposite. He is the boy who is happy to have attention, to show off, to perform on any stage that will have him. Parents and teachers glow at the thought that he will grow up to be a man oozing self-confidence and self-congratulation in his success in the world. I met grown-up versions of such a child once when I was asked to design and teach a course for one of our leading IIMs. The course was on the creative journeys of artists. A progressive professor on faculty had decided that it would do his students a world of good to be acquainted with art, which functions on totally different principles than those operating in business and its management. I was excited at the prospect of meeting the cream of the cream, as the professor described his students. My course was to begin with 5 foundational lectures that would lay the ground, and then invited artists were going to talk to the students about their individual journeys in art. I was happy to see so many bright young faces before me. I looked forward to engaging them in thinking about art, its methods, its problems, its issues. However, even before I was 15 minutes into my first lecture, a student interrupted with a question that had nothing to do with what I was saying. It was the kind of naive question that the uninitiated tend to ask. The student asked rather cockily, I thought, "Ma'am, artists are supposed to be poor, but many of them make loads of money. How do you explain that?" This question and the ones that followed were beyond my power to answer. They came from the environment where they floated around with no roots in reality. If the students did not attend to what I was saying, they would never get a grip on the real world of art. So I suggested to them that I would take their questions at the end of my lecture. Even as I said this, I knew from the students' body language and the way that progressive professor who was sitting in on the lecture looked at me that I had said the wrong thing. After the lecture was over, the professor said to me mildly, "You know, we encourage interaction in class. The students are marked on their class activity." Fine, but why, I wonder, should they not be marked on listening silently, absorbing what the lecturer was saying, and then asking questions related to that at the end? I didn't ask the question in my mind. I knew the students were preparing to enter the world of business, the world of cutthroat competition, where making themselves audible, even when they had nothing to say, would mark them as smart, ambitious, and go-getting. Audibility mattered. Silence was stupid and self-destructive. Noise has spread its tentacles in every field. We used to think that spiritual men and women needed to be silent in order to contemplate the universe. That is no longer true. They need to publicize themselves as much as any manufacturer who has a product to sell. Working on business principle, today's spiritual gurus first identify a need. The need, real or imagined, is for inner peace. Inner peace is missing in people's lives because modern life is fast and full of mental stress and strain. The spiritual guru then creates a unique selling proposition, which will produce the peace that the devotees seek. This must then be sold to people. That cannot be done in silence. Gurus, therefore, give interviews to the press and on television. Their photographs are blown up to fill enormous hoardings. They flash grins at us, which are just as wide as the models in advertisements. Silence is for later, when their devotees gather for guidance. Silence is then part of the total package, spiritual package, that they offer them. Devotees go away thinking very well of themselves when they have been called upon to close their eyes, seal their lips, and declutter their minds in order to concentrate on cosmic truths. I once attended a popular guru's meeting because my hostess happened to be his devotee. While the charismatic guru quoted copiously from the Gita and other spiritual texts during his sermon, he ended by doing what he was famous for. This was his unique selling proposition, which endeared him to his devotees. He relaxed, came down to earth from his spiritual heights, became one of them, and spoke in their lingo. In this mode, he even told jokes. But what I remember most from that relaxed chat of his was the comfort that he offered his well-heeled listeners. I know some of you suffer from guilt because you own luxurious cars, yeah, he said. But why feel guilty? Our religion is liberal. Yes, there is dharma and moksha at two ends of our purusharthas, but in between are kama and artha. You are allowed to enjoy earthly joys. If I have suggested that such gurus are exclusively products of the industrial age, I'm wrong. They appear to have existed even in Santa Tukaram's times. One of his abhangas points satirically to the sellers of bhakti. The abhanga goes, Sarthavila Vana, Paisa Ghatala Dukana, Se Ja Pahije, Se Kali Ahe Siddhachi Zavali. Translated into English, Sri Tukaram Maharaj is saying, I have a stock of many goods. I have set up a spacious shop. Ask for anything, anytime, and I have it right here, near at hand. Artists form a very small fraction of this total population, and they are the only ones who value silence, seeking it in the midst of all this noise. Without silence, they can't work. They can't exist as artists. Without silence, they can hardly hear themselves think. There are, I have decided, 3 kinds of silence in an artist's life. The first is the silence that precedes a work of art. The second is a silence that exists within a work of art. And the third is the silence that follows or should follow as a response to a work of art. I will begin with a story that illustrates the first kind of silence. It is told by the illustrious art historian, Dr. B.N. Goswami, in his book, Conversations. Dr. Goswami is in Zurich. He is attending a festival of Indian arts organized by a local museum. There is to be a performance of Kudiyattam that evening. The curator of the museum is very keen that visitors should have an opportunity to observe the preparation that precedes the performance of Kudiyattam. He has invited interested observers to watch how the actors prepare and apply their makeup. Quite a few people turn up. The actors are grinding pigments and making pastes in complete silence. As and when the powders and pastes are ready, they take turns to apply them on one another's faces, again in complete silence. This is done with meticulous precision because each stripe, swathe, and stalk of color says something about the character that the actor is going to play. The process appears tedious and interminable to the Swiss observers. They begin to fidget. At one point, one of them asks Dr. Goswami in a whisper, why don't the actors use the new cosmetic materials that are readily available in the market? Surely that will cut down on time. Goswami interprets the question to the Guruji. The Guruji draws him aside and says in a low voice, please tell them, we need this time of silence. We are preparing to enter the world of the gods this evening. Prabhakar Barve has described a similar process in his book, Cora Canvas. The artist is about to start a new work. Before him stands a blank canvas. He sits staring at it equally blankly and in silence. Soon the canvas begins to look less blank. The artist notices the weave of the canvas, the occasional knot in the weave, an ant scurrying across the frame. Next, the canvas begins to assume strange shapes and meanings. Finally, as Barve puts it, the surface gives way to unsuspected depths where the artist's imagination rapidly follows. Meanwhile, a reverse process has taken place in the artist's mind. At first, his mind is cluttered with thoughts, feelings, and ideas. The artist needs to empty his mind of all this clutter before his imagination can create something fresh and new. Barve gives us an evocative description of the magical moment when this happens. He says, when the artist's mind breaks through the layers of accumulated thought and attains its pristine state, it is as though a patch of deep blue sky has broken through a thick cover of gray cloud. This is the silence that precedes art. The second kind of silence, the silence that exists within art, carries as much meaning as do words or images or musical notes. In painting, images gain meaning from the negative space around and between them. Negative space in painting is akin to silence in music and drama. Poets ask for their poems to be laid out in a certain way that leaves a lot of white space around, or for their lines to be so spaced that brief silences are created between them. And we are expected to read those silences as we read the words. I'm reminded of one moment of silence in music that has remained with me as a vivid memory for several years. The Dhrupad singer, Pandit Uday Bhabankar, was presenting an alap in Rag Bhairav. He is a philosopher, musician. He was exploring time and space through this raga, the Adi Raga. At one point in his meditative music, he hit the top note, the Shadja. He held it for a long time, then stretched it till all we could hear at the end was a barely audible point of sound. The sound was so fine that we weren't aware when it faded away altogether into the elements. In the silence that followed lay a whole universe of unheard sound. The musician was inviting us to listen to it with him. One had to be completely silent to share in the rich mystery of that moment. But sadly, our audience is not given to silence. A high note held for so long excites them. For them, this is not a moment for listening to silence in silence. It is an invitation to applaud the musician's skill, long and loud. This they did, and so lost the moment. The third kind of silence in art is a silence that should follow as a response to a work of art. The audience in this case has been found wanting. Peter Brook, the English theatre director who passed away recently, practiced two kinds of silence in his theatre. One was economy of speech and gesture, leaving space for meanings to emerge and resonate. The other was economy in stage settings, to cut down on visual noise. In Brook's seminal book on theatre, The Empty Space, he argues that if one man walks across a bare stage while another man watches him, they have created an act of theatre. About stage setting, he says, if there is scenery, the space is not empty and the mind of the spectator is already furnished. A naked area does not tell a story. So each spectator's imagination, attention, and thought process is free and unfettered. In providing the visual silence of a bare stage, Brook not only frees himself from realistic clutter, but he calls upon the audience to use the silence he has created to free their own imagination. The silence after art, that is, the silence in which art is received, is the aspect that I wish to look at in Brook's work. Let us see how a play comes to be realized. The actors have worked hard, they have improvised, they have rehearsed rigorously for months, and now they are at last ready for their final test, facing the audience. Brook says, the great barometer is in the levels of the audience's silence. If one listens carefully, one can learn everything about a performance from the degree of silence that it creates. Sometimes a certain emotion ripples through the audience and the quality of silence is transformed. A few seconds later, the silence will inevitably weaken from the degree of intensity that it had earlier acquired. Then begins the coughing and the shuffling and the fidgeting, which tells us that the audience is bored. This serves as a red flag to the actors. For Brook, it means that the performance has died on stage. Brooke did not wish to bore his audience. His silences were meant actually to engage the audience if the audience was prepared to bring their imaginations to the performance. But the Japanese theater director, Shogo Ota, although he was aware that his new work would bore an unprepared audience, he was willing to take the risk for the sake of his experiment in silence. Ota began by asking himself radical questions. Brooke has said very few theater directors dare to ask themselves such questions because they lead to a void. And a void has no markers to guide directors. Ota, like Prabhakar Barve, was aware that the truly new could only emerge from a void. And so he proceeded to declutter his mind. Why do I need costumes? Why do I need a set? Why do I need words? These are the questions he asked himself, and by process of elimination, he came to what he saw as the only requirement of theater: the human body and an empty space. With this in mind, he created a play called The Water Station. It is a play without words. I saw production of this play directed by the Kerala director Shankar Venkateshwaran. I saw it at Mumbai's Prithvi Theatre. The group of actors that he had collected from all over India had lived together for months, fine-tuning their bodies to the slow pace of movement and the total silence that the play demanded of them. The stage set was a simple ramp that emerged from one wing and sloped down to the middle of the stage, where there was a water tap, a running water tap. The continuous trickle of water and some music were the only sounds we heard. A dispirited line of women and men dressed in ragged clothes with household belongings strapped to their backs walked down the ramp at a slow, measured pace. They looked like displaced people. Coming down, they stopped at the water tap and drank from it. Some squabbled, but silently. Others embraced, but silently. Then they moved on, one by one, also silently, to the opposite wing and exited from it. Perhaps they were seeking a better life beyond. Their progress down the ramp and across the stage and out through the wing was watched expressionless by a man who sat silently on top of a tall heap of junk. That junk contained all the discards of our modern life. That man was our representative on stage. The audience was silent, but more in confusion than with attention. This was a totally new experience, totally unexpected, and they didn't really know how to respond. Gradually, however, they settled down the pace of the play and the silence. However, halfway through, some began to shuffle and some silently crept out of the auditorium. Of those who stayed, not all found the experience stimulating or even interesting. So, what did Ota achieve by creating such a play? He proved to himself and to other directors that silence could create valid theater that mesmerized at least some people. I would count myself as one of those who was totally mesmerized by these human beings and what they were saying about themselves without speaking. To these people, like me, he offered a rare opportunity to discover in ourselves the ability through concentrated silence to hear unspoken speech. For that is what silence is. It is wordless speech. The popular art of our times is noisy. It offers us bright surfaces. We get used to consuming it by skimming those bright surfaces. To offer an audience silence in the midst of noise could be considered, I think, an essential service. To give people the opportunity to discover that by being totally silent, if only for a brief while in the theater or in the concert hall, is to discover themselves anew, to test their ability to abandon surfaces and see what lies in the depths. The water station gave us the chance to understand what was being said when nothing was being said. The experience of the water station was not confined, as far as I'm concerned, to the 1 hour which I spent in the theater, watching its slow, silent unfolding. It has returned to me often in recent years when the inhabitants of countless countries in Africa, in the Middle East, and now in Europe have had to flee their homes because of war and other man-made calamities. Finally, having made so much noise about the need for silence, I will add my last bit of noise by reading Pablo Neruda's poem, Keeping Quiet. Keeping Quiet, Pablo Neruda. Now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still. For once on the face of the earth, let us not speak in any language. Let us stop for 1 second and not move our arms so much. It would be an exotic moment without rush Without engines, we would all be together in a sudden strangeness. Fishermen in the cold sea will not harm whales, and the man gathering salt will look at his hurt hands. Those who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire, victories with no survivors, they would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade, doing nothing. What I want should not be confused with total inactivity. Life is what it is about. I want no truck with death. If we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving, and for once could do nothing, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. Perhaps the earth can teach us, as when everything seems dead and later proves to be alive. Now, I will count up to 12, and you keep quiet, and I will go. Thank you.
I think I need to be silent for a little while longer. I can't speak as yet, Shanta. I'll just allow everybody else also to be quiet for a moment. We have many who are still reflecting on what you're saying. I'd like to open up the conversation. So participants, Shrija, I think you can unmute everybody, and whoever wants to say something.
Ma'am, participants can unmute themselves.
Yeah.
Good evening. Could I ask a question?
Yeah, you can switch on your camera as well, please. I think it's should be.
It's okay.
Can you
Thank
switch on
you.
your camera?
Thank you, Shanta ma'am. I'd rather not. Yeah. This is Supant Bhattacharya from Nagpur. And thank you for a very disquieting and I don't know. I mean, I'm still haven't quite emerged from what you have, from the spell of what you have said. But my question is about a theater. Maybe one play, a water station, would succeed without words. But theater essentially an audio visual medium. Could we have multiple plays without? Wouldn't it become too gimmicky and repetitive? And I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud.
Yes, you are absolutely right. An experiment like that is only made to prove that silence on stage is possible. That's all. Also, it tells writers and directors that they don't have to fill everything up with words. Even in theater, silences are extremely important.
Pinter, for example.
Yeah, I remember watching a play. I forget what it was called. It was a Marathi play. And even when there were, say, 3 people on the stage talking to each other, saying lines which the playwright had written, my attention was constantly drawn towards the female actor who stood on the side listening to them attentively. Now, silence, if you accept that silence is a good thing on stage, then actors can listen as intensely as when they speak. So directors and writers can take away many lessons from this sort of experiment. You are quite right in saying that it would become gimmicky, particularly because other people trying this experiment would actually be copying the original.
Yes.
So that comes without the kind of internal conviction that drove the Japanese playwright. And that internal conviction, whatever kind of theater you do, is very important because that holds the audience's attention.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Yeah, that clears a lot of things up. Thank you.
Yep, Prantik has raised his hand. Yeah, Prantik.
Yeah. Good evening, Shanta ma'am.
Hi.
I'm Prantik Banerjee from Nagpur.
Yeah.
One, an observation, and second, a question. Thank you for, first of all, for such an eloquent talk on silence. While I was listening to you giving us the 3 categories of the relationship between art and silence, then Satish Gujral came to my mind, especially when you were talking about painting. And I thought it was such a wonderful example that here was a painter who chose to refuse an implant and be deaf, so that his intrinsic relationship with art continued to be more expressive in silence rather than in noise.
That's right. Yeah.
So Satish Gujral's example came to my mind. That's just an observation. What I would like to also ask you, and I'd like you to comment on that, but also like to ask you, would you consider, therefore, mime as one of the most profound and eloquent expressions of art?
Mime?
Yeah.
Well, you know, as I said, silence is a form of speech. And if you watch a mime artist, he or she is actually imitating actions that we perform in life. There is no such thing, at least not in my experience of viewing theater, no such thing as abstract mime. So mime I consider to be a form of speech, wordless speech, but speech. all the same. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, it kind of it's again an example of aesthetics of silence, isn't it? And
Yeah.
Satish Gujral, of course, as I said, came as a ready example.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
about an artist choosing to shut himself out from all kind of noise.
Yeah. I do that myself because when I'm working, I live in a house which has more windows and doors than walls. So all sorts of noises let themselves into this room from where I'm talking. And in the evenings, particularly, a whole lot of children come down and right outside my window, they play very noisy games. I do a little walking around, but then I wear earmuffs because I need to hear myself think before I write. So there are various ways in which artists manage to have silence around themselves. I will say that men are particularly lucky in this respect because wives keep noise out. He is busy working, don't disturb. I, as a woman, have grown up writing with noise, but now with age, I can't take it. I need silence very badly.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
There was another hand raised, Alok Chandra, if he's there. Any more questions? We have in our chats, we have a lot of praise, Shanta ma'am. It's just amazingly stimulating. Amol says, excellent. Neha Meshram says, ma'am, that was magnificent. Your words will resonate in each of us. Dumeshwari Sudhakar Chavre says, very excellent, ma'am.
Thank you.
There's one more message. If anyone wants to say anything, please unmute yourself and you're most welcome.
May I?
Yes, yes, of course.
Good evening. This is Amol Padwad from Delhi.
Hello.
Hello. And Shanta Madam, I noticed that you consistently use the word noise, which I assume implies that you have no objections to sound.
No.
And I'm reminded of the use of the term noise in all kinds of sciences to indicate something as an unwanted element, something that has to be removed so that the functioning goes on smoothly.
Yeah.
So would you agree that silence becomes a sellable commodity in the words of those people who are no more living with sounds, but have already gone into all kinds of unwanted things? The examples you give, for example, the management students from IIM, where their life is full of noise, quote unquote, in the sense that they are no more listening to sounds which are naturally part of our existence, but are surrounded by those kinds of things which are not necessarily constructive or contributing positively. So how do we make that distinction as ordinary people between, making a distinction in understanding whether we are surrounded by sounds or noises, and how do we save ourselves from noises?
Oh, I think at a very primary level, I think our ears, if they are in working condition, tell us what is sound and what is noise. I don't think people, for instance, listen to a burbling stream and say, "Ee, how much noise." No, bubbling stream is very pleasant sound. So I think our ears should be able to discriminate between sound and noise. And I will say this much. A lot of older people can't take a lot of modern music, and they always call it noise. So noise is something that is not acceptable to the way that our ears have been tuned. I often think when the Ganpati procession passes my house, I happen to live quite near the sea. So all the processions pass by my house. And of course, working during those days is impossible. What the noise actually is melody. They're playing songs.
Mhm. Yeah.
And they're dancing. And but to me, it sounds like noise. I go out into the veranda and I see that these people are not at all thinking the way I do or hearing it as my ears hear.
Yeah.
And then I decide, okay, let me join them.
Mhm.
And I'm afraid you will laugh at this, but standing in my veranda, I do dances like that. And when you start dancing, then you fall into the beat, which earlier you thought was noise.
Oh.
So there are ways in which you can convert yourself also to be able to live with the environment in which you find yourself. But basically, our ears tell us what is noise and what is sound.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, Supant again, could I ask another short question?
Yeah.
I have read your book on the theatre of Veena Chawla. Would you say she was moving along this track? The experiments in expression using movement and motion that she tried. Of course, I mean, I didn't make much sense of what she was trying. I have not actually seen a theatre, but your introduction was definitely very useful in gaining access to her kind of theatre. Was she trying something similar?
Yes, in the sense that she reacted very strongly against realistic theatre. That's how her journey began, by rejecting the theatre of words. One of the first plays, perhaps the first play that she did, was Savitri. And she carved out a 40-minute script. I think it was just about 40 minutes from an epic poem that had God knows how many hundred verses. Because she believed, as you have said, that movement is one kind of speech. Silence, of course, is another kind of speech. And she went on this journey till she came to a point where working with Kuriyattam artists, she discovered that the percussion is a form of speech. If you listen to what percussion instruments are saying, then you understand something. And so she created a play called Ganapati, in which there was just music, percussion, and some singing. But the extremely interesting point in this play was that all these 5 percussionists are playing on their various instruments, and they're very happy with themselves because they're talking to each other through their instruments. Then comes this Frenchman who was part of this group, and he comes in with a saxophone and begins to play the saxophone. And the percussionists look at him very suspiciously and rather dismissively. What is this foreign element trying to intrude on what we are saying? And then suddenly, if you are looking and listening, you realize, good God, that saxophone is like Ganpati's trunk. And the rest of the musicians slowly come to an understanding that it's alien music, but it's music. And then they all start playing together. Now, no word was being said, but the play said all these things. So you're right, Vinapani was trying to cut down as much as possible on words.
Your book was a big help in trying to understand her theatre, because we are not familiar with this kind of work. Thank you.
Ma'am, can I, Prantik here again. Can I ask you something?
Okay. There's one
Smita?
question, Karthik, from Smita Kalikar. May I ask that first, and then I'll hand it over to you.
Sure.
So Smita Kalikar has written a question here. If Smita, if you want to unmute and ask, otherwise I'll read it out. She says, good evening, ma'am. Silence is definitely golden. One thing I realized while listening to your mesmerizing talk, if silence is so crucial for our inner peace and spirituality, do you think noise would act in a similar way for people with hearing disabilities?
I guess so. I mean, noise is distracting, disruptive for us because we can hear it. If you can't, then the very word noise doesn't exist. But from what I know, is that hearing impaired people feel vibrations, and if they feel vibrations, perhaps they feel some vibrations are pleasant, others are not. I really can't say. But I will say this much, that people who do practice spiritual exercises, I think they come to a point where they can really control what gets through to them and what they can simply cut out. Maybe they just manage to cut out noise and because they have this internal silence, that is the silence that they hear. Perhaps I'm just saying this off the cuff. I haven't thought about it.
There was Akhilesh Singh who had raised his hand, and I think we may have missed him. He may have left. Yeah, Prantik, can you go ahead?
Shanta ma'am, you are respected as one of the few writers right now in our country who refuses to be silent and who's never been afraid to speak out against a lot of things that are disturbing us. You know, in an environment or in a climate where Samvad has become increasingly threatened and voices of dissent get increasingly silenced, is it possible for silence to be expressed through art as the loudest form of protest?
See, it depends on what art you practice, because music, of course, cannot be silent. It has to do with words and melody. But in conversation, silence says a lot. If ever you are face to face with somebody whose ideas you don't agree with, and it has happened to me, a conversation with somebody, a relation, in fact, who has extremely, what I consider to be extreme views about the kinds of things, in fact, that you are referring to. And because she is very close to me, I have argued and argued. But you come to the conclusion that talking ultimately isn't getting through. There's a shutter. That shutter comes down and keeps out any opinion you may express, which is contrary to the opinion that is held by the person. So talking makes no sense. One day, I stopped speaking in the middle of an argument. I just stopped speaking. And I think my silence said a lot. And this relation of mine, in that silence, heard her own voice. And somehow she came down a couple of pegs and said, I understand what you're saying. And we left it at that. That was an admission enough. And it wasn't the result of what I had said. It was the result of my not saying and allowing her to listen to her own voice, which she found troubling. So yeah, in personal conversations, silence is often used to say things, but you can't do it in art. Art, protest and dissent is something that has to be expressed, not left unexpressed.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Vaijanti Asolkar has raised her hand. Yeah, Vaijanti. Vaijanti. Vaijanti, would you like to ask something or say something? You've raised your hand.
Hello, thank you, Ruta. I was trying to unmute myself.
Acha.
Good evening, Shanta ma'am.
Good evening.
Yeah, I'm a great fan of your
Thank
works.
you.
I just wanted to know, there were some musicians and composers who were deaf, and they have composed brilliant music. How could they do that? I mean, around them, it was all silence because of their deafness. Yet they created wonderful music, which till now lives, which is still being played in orchestras, and those symphonies are very, very famous. Everybody almost loves them, those symphonies. So how could they do that? I mean, I'm not asking you a direct question. I'm just
Yeah,
curious
the
about the
wonder of it.
process. Yeah, process. How could
Yeah.
they have done that?
I wish I knew. It's a mystery. But I don't know how. There must be a way in which they have heard music, because there has to be music in them for them to produce it. So the real question to me is, how does that music get into them in the first place if they can't hear?
Yes.
And do they wear hearing aids? Isn't that possible? Beethoven didn't.
Beethoven, Mozart.
Didn't.
I
Yeah.
mean, not possible,
They all,
I believe.
they
Yeah.
all composed, but yeah, they see, they lost their hearing later. So music was already in them. And in the Western music, the notations tell you what the sound is going to be. So you compose accordingly. But someone who is born without hearing, I really don't know how they compose music. It's a wonder.
Yes, yes, because it's like you create something, then you want to listen to it, and then you think whether there has to be some correction somewhere, so it sounds more melodious or more music-wise correct and appealing. So all these faculties they did not have. So how
See,
they must have
that,
done?
sorry, that process, once you have answered the question, how the music has got into them, then they hear the music which they have made and they correct it accordingly. The main thing is, how do they hear music at all in order to compose their own music? So we'll just have to leave it at that. I think, we should ask them. They would be able to tell.
Thank you so much. I suppose my question was relevant to what you spoke about.
Yeah.
Ruta, one final question.
Thank you so much.
Right?
One minute, Shupant. I
Yep,
have a
fine.
couple of questions in the
Yeah,
chat
good.
box, so I'd like to
Yeah.
get them through to Shanta. There is
Sure.
a comment from Kanchan. Buddy, thank you, madam, for letting us know that silence is so vocal, which we never thought of. Silence, and into brackets, she has typed Shant in Marathi, is hidden in your name, madam, she says.
Lots of people have commented on that. But my friend Kiran Nagarkar long ago said to me, I wonder how you look with your mouth shut. So I must have been very talkative.
There is Shivani Balkundi has written, it was an absolutely wonderful experience listening to you, ma'am. Thanks for explaining the unknown silence within us. Nirja Murthy has written, a truly inspiring talk. Shanta articulated many thoughts that instinctively come to our minds. but which we may not have dwelt upon and clarified to ourselves. I enjoyed listening to her and I'm taking many ideas away to mull over. Neha Meshram has said, this lecture was pure bliss. Thank you very much. It gives us immense pleasure to see and hear from such eminent speakers. Yeah, and I think there are more messages. SK has written that silence makes us more productive. Santoshi Bhivani says, heartfelt gratitude. So true. Silence is golden. Speech is silver. And Smita you had answered a question on disability. She says, thank you for asking my question, Ruta ma'am. I couldn't do it as I was surrounded by a lot of noise due to some procession. It made me realize how important silence is. Shupant, your question, and then I have a small one.
Yeah. Shanta ma'am, you have played Sita in Pearl Padamsi's production long back, I remember. I have read reviews of that play. What about the silence of the women in our epic? How did you as an actor kind of discover that silence? Because I remember in your interview you had said that you were not really very happy and you couldn't understand what Pearl Padamsi was trying to say, and you had Satyadev Dubey in your cast. So what kind of experience was it? These are icons we have only heard about.
Well, it actually, the play itself was dissenting play. This was Snehalata Reddy, her play, and she was a leftist, and so she was doing a take on the epic Sita. So the very fact that she had put Sita at the center of the play, and it was a title that she gave to her play, meant that she was picking her out of the silent background and putting her in the center of the stage as a human being, as a person. And I would say actually that the space that an actor occupies, that actor doesn't even have to speak. The space makes his presence significant. I remember there was this festival of plays by Dalit writers, and they staged the festival at Shivaji Mandir, which is absolutely the center of Brahminical theatre, if I may call it that. And many people asked why they couldn't have found a space that didn't already carry this baggage. And the answer was, we are claiming that space. We want to be there. We want to challenge those people who think that this space is their exclusive legacy. So if Sita is the title of a play and she is the central character, that said a lot to me, which in fact is why I agreed to play the role in the first. But I mean, it was just my first attempt, and I was very nervous, and I was bad. A real actress would have done a wonderful job of that role. I'm afraid I couldn't. But I didn't expect anyone to bring that up.
Yeah, you have written about it in your One Foot on the Ground.
Oh, my fault. It was about the voice. That's right.
Yeah.
It had to do with the voice because Pearl
I
kept
really
saying,
I'm sorry,
yeah,
but we just can't seem to stop listening to you.
yeah, yeah,
So wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. Thank
There
you so
was a
much.
comment from, thank you. There was a comment from Shraddha Jagirdar, if you remember, Shanta.
Hi, Shraddha.
She's not here any longer. I told her to join back, but she's written,
Okay.
thank you, Shanta. Yeah, she's written, thank you, Shanta, as a writer and an editor. Your words resonated so deeply. I realize all the more deeply now how important silence is to our process of work. So she was there. I think I missed her message.
Yes,
It had come
I
up.
know. I saw the name.
Yeah, she was there. So then
Yeah.
in that context, I wanted to ask you a small question that we speak so much about the silence in theater, the performing arts rather, the silence in music, the pauses, the pause between two sentences of dialogue, very crucial. The pause between two movements in music is very crucial. What about the pauses in the written word, in fiction, and in poetry? I mean, how would are they as
Yes, yes.
do you resonate? Are they as loud as the silences in the performing arts?
Yes. I think what's happened is in the history of literature, as we have moved into modernity, the verbosity of earlier literatures has given way to things that are left unsaid, things that we read between the lines. I wish I could immediately give you an example of this, but a lot of playwrights do that. The unsaid, which forms the subtext of the text, that speaks just as loudly as the text itself. So yes, even in literature, even in drama, there are those pauses. You know, I think it was Mahesh El-Kunchwar, I'm not sure, but who said that because his plays are full of these silences, and actors are often not comfortable with silence. So directors give them what is called business. So because an actor can't just stand still and bring sufficient intensity to the act of standing still, the actor is given business. Like if it's a woman, she will clean rice, or if it's a man, he will light a cigarette, stuff like that, which is called business. But business is often stuffed into pauses which are significant, which are meaningful. So it's also a question of how sensitive and how skilled an actor is to be able to make the most of those pauses.
Thank you. So that has been truly magnificent an experience. This whole 90 odd minutes, more than 90 minutes, we have been almost for 2 hours, more than 2 hours we are here. So, and I don't want to tire you out too much, Shanta. So over to you, Shilpa. Before we propose the formal vote of thanks, I'd like to just share with you that we had members of the press as well listening to you. And we had poets, writers, teachers, students from all disciplines, my friends, their friends who don't really belong to academics or teaching, but who are avid readers and theater goers. So cross section of society has listened to you today, Shanta. I am truly grateful for the silence that is so evocative as it came through your words. I'd like to thank all the participants here who patiently waited. There was a small technical glitch that we are guilty of. So I apologize on behalf of our team. We'll try and make it up to you, definitely. But thank you so much for being here. Yeah, Meenakshi is saying that YouTube channel is also full of praise. There are other comments here, full of praise and full of gratitude, I would say, for articulating our innermost thoughts and for articulating our innermost silences, Shanta. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now Shilpa, she would propose the formal vote of thanks for this evening.
Thank you, Ruta ma'am. Well, silence is something more than just the mere absence of noise. It can also be the presence of peace, clarity, and tranquility. With literal and symbolic noise all around us, it's important to take the time to embrace silence and use it for renewal rather than seeking even more distraction. Good evening to one and all gathered on this virtual platform. It's my privilege to propose a formal vote of thanks. I, Shilpa Sarode, on behalf of the Department of English of L.A.D. and Srimati R.P. College for Women, Nagpur, extend my sincere thanks to our guest speaker, Shanta Gokhale, who spared time from her busy schedule to be with us on this evening and shared with us your thoughts on silence. Ma'am, your thoughts have given us a new perspective towards silence, especially in the field of arts. I thank Dr. Prashant Bokhare, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Gondwana University, Gadchiroli, for gracing the occasion with his presence. I extend my gratitude towards the Secretary and Director of the Women's Education Society, Dr. Shamla Nair, and Dr. Harsha Zaria, CAO of Women's Education Society, for their encouragement and motivation. I thank Dr. Pooja Pathak, officiating principal of L.A.D. College, for always being a constant and dynamic support for all our venture. I thank our vice principal, Dr. Durgesh Nandini Titarmare, for always being with us in all our programs. I would like to thank Dr. Dipali Kotwal, our former principal, especially Dr. Kotwal guided us right from conceptualization of the Dr. Narayanan Memorial lecture to its execution. We have learned a lot from you, madam, and we will continue to seek your blessing. An event like this cannot happen overnight. The wheel started rolling weeks ago. Our staff members worked with complete dedication for the execution of this event. I extend my sincere gratitude towards our head of the department, Dr. Ruta Dharmadikari, and my colleagues, Dr. Nidhi Meshram and Dr. Meenakshi Kulkarni, for all the efforts taken by them for the success of today's event. I thank Kanchan Bade, head of the Department of Applied Electronics, for her minute attention to all the details. I would also like to thank and appreciate Dr. Shrija Kurup faculty member from the Commerce Department, for her technical support that she has extended. Thank you so much, Rija. A big shout out to all wonderful participants for being such an enthusiastic audience. Thank you so much and have a good evening. I declare the meet over.
Thank you so much, Shilpa. Thank you, everyone. And let's meet again for the third Dr. Kamala Narayan Memorial Lecture next year. Pooja is here. Dr. Pathak is here.
Yeah. I have no words to speak, Ruta, because as the title of the lecture, I was listening to her very, very silently. Secondly, madam is there. I hope she has left. I think she has left.
I think she's left.
Yeah, she has left. Okay. Anyway, my heartiest congratulations to the entire team of Department of English for organizing such a wonderful lecture under Dr. Kamala Narayan Lecture Series. Heartiest congratulations to all of you all.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
ma'am. Thank you.
Yes. So can we leave now?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Okay.